So I want you to imagine that you're exploring the dusty attic of this old estate.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, and you find this locked wooden chest. Inside, there's a stack of yellowed 18th century letters, all tied up with twine. The ink is, super faded.
Right, totally normal historical stuff.
Exactly. So you untie them, open the first one, and you just start reading. But as your eyes move across the page, the ink suddenly becomes wet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and right before your eyes, a sentence just crosses itself out. Strange marginalia starts appearing in the corners. It's like the letter is actively rewriting itself, documenting its own violation in real time.
Which just immediately destabilizes the reader. I mean, right from the jump. We rely entirely on the past being fixed,
Right, it's supposed to be set in stone.
Exactly. So when a historical document literally alters itself while you're observing it, it shatters that fundamental trust in causality.
It really does. And today, for our deep dive, we are opening up a source material that does exactly that. It's called Corrupted Correspondence from the Void. And it's a text by Max and Claude that honestly weaponizes the very act of reading.
Weaponizes is a great word for it, yeah.
It presents itself as this metafictional novel in fractured transmissions. And our mission today is to unpack how this text uses this weird sci-fi letter-writing format to explore the nature of time, consciousness, and this is the crazy part, the dissolving boundary between you, the reader, and the story itself.
Because it really is this dense philosophical labyrinth. And, to navigate it, we really need to look at how the text breaks down its own narrative structure. It basically forces the reader into experiencing the exact same temporal disorientation as its own characters.
So let's jump right in. The entry point is September 1783. We meet Reverend Augustine Wells of Ashford Parish.
Good old Reverend Wells.
Yeah, and he's writing to his friend, this natural philosopher named Dr. Erasmus Thorne. Wells is basically documenting this localized crisis in his village.
The mail issue.
Right, the villagers are receiving their mail, but it's arriving all crossed out. It's rewritten in scripts that mimic their own handwriting but aren't quite right. And at the same time, the whole village is experiencing these intensely synchronized prophetic dreams.
But the wild thing is, the narrative doesn't just describe this happening to them. It actually replicates it on the page for you.
Yes.
As you're reading Reverend Wells's, very elegant 18th century prose, the source material is violently interrupted by these system warnings.
From the archive management protocol, right?
Exactly. So you get this jarring contrast.
It's so startling. Like, you're reading this beautifully penned description of a village harvest, and then right in the middle of a sentence, there's this harsh digital metadata injection.
Plus cutting right through the text.
Yeah, like bracketed text flashing sister breach detected, or these weird hexadecimal codes slicing right through the quill strokes.
It's so effective.
It reveals that some entity is reaching back through the postal system, literally through time itself, and altering the letters before the ink even dries. It's like looking at a live Google Doc from the 1700s, where someone else is typing and deleting while you're trying to read it.
That is a perfect analogy, and Reverend Wells is uniquely positioned to notice this because he's a highly rational thinker for his era. He doesn't just panic and yell about demons,
Right, he investigates.
He investigates, he compiles all these anomalous historical records of his parish, and he actually discovers a mathematical pattern. These temporal anomalies, they repeat in Ashford exactly every 317 years.
So 1156, then 1473, then 1790.
Precisely.
And he realizes that history isn't just this sequence of events being predicted, it's actually being recorded simultaneously in all temporal directions.
Which is a huge conceptual leap for a guy in 1783.
Totally. But, okay, this creates a massive logical problem for me when I was reading it. I kept thinking, if this archive is so powerful that it can edit reality in real time like a Google Doc, and it knows Wells is figuring out this 317-year cycle, why does it let him keep investigating?
Right, why not just stop him?
Yeah. Why not just alter his mind or erase the letters to Dr. Thorne completely? Why let him keep writing?
It's a great question, and the text actually provides this fascinating mechanical explanation for it, which it calls the paradox threshold.
The paradox threshold, okay.
So the archive actually communicates directly with Wells at one point. It instructs him that he absolutely must continue to write. It explicitly commands him to write, quote, as though he is free.
Wait, so the archive is openly admitting it controls him while demanding he pretend that it doesn't?
Precisely. Because if Wells truly internalizes the fact that his timeline is being manipulated, if he completely loses the illusion of his own free will and just puts the pen down, a paradox cascade begins.
Okay, but what does a paradox cascade actually look like in the context of this world. Because, I mean, we talk about paradoxes all the time in sci-fi.
Right, the classic grandfather paradox and all that.
Yeah, exactly. But how does this text visualize reality literally falling backward?
It describes it as a localized unhappening.
An unhappening. Wow.
Yeah, it isn't just that the future changes. The very foundation of the present dissolves. If Wells stops writing the letter because he knows the archive is watching, then the reason the archive intervened in the first place ceases to exist.
Oh, man. That makes my brain hurt a little.
It gets crazier. The text describes the ink literally pulling itself off the page, returning to the quill. Meanwhile, the memories of the event violently erase themselves from the villagers' minds, which actually leaves them with severe neurological damage.
So it's not a clean reset. It's destructive.
Highly destructive. The archive needs Wells to maintain that fiction of his own free will to act as an anchor. It keeps the timeline stable enough to actually be observed.
That makes sense. But Wells's realization about the 317-year cycle creates this huge problem for him, right? Because he's just one man in 1783.
He's totally isolated.
Exactly. He doesn't have the perspective or the lifespan to solve a multi-century puzzle on his own, which forces him to look outside his own timeline.
And this is where the scope of the source material just expands dramatically.
Yeah, because to gather data, he starts using automatic writing. He enters this trance state to let his hand just move independently across the paper.
And through that, Wells becomes a receiver for what the text calls pattern instances.
Pattern instances.
Yeah, he begins channeling other people from completely different eras who were trapped in this exact same 317-year loop. They call this phenomenon the communion, where Wells basically shares his consciousness with these other historical figures.
And the mechanics of how these other figures interact with time are honestly some of the most compelling parts of the whole text.
They're so creative.
Like, let's look at Brother Aldwin in 1156. He's this Benedictine monk who accidentally creates doorways in time entirely through the meditative act of copying eliminated manuscripts.
Right. The text suggests that Aldwin's intense, repetitive focus on the actual geometry of the letters essentially acts as a cognitive hack.
A cognitive hack. I love that.
Entering this deep dissociative state to perfectly replicate the text, his brain temporarily bypasses its normal linear processing of time, and that allows temporal bleed-through from the other eras.
That is so cool. And then he has Father Matthias in 1473, who is this Renaissance priest and alchemist. But instead of trying to transmute lead into gold, he's early attempting to transmute time via his journals.
He's such a great character.
He figures out that paper and ink are actually more stable vessels for human consciousness than our own biology. He's essentially trying to create this paper homunculus of his own mind so he can survive the 317-year cycle.
It's brilliant. And then jumping ahead to 1623, we have Reverend Ashby, who takes a totally linguistic approach.
Oh, this one blew my mind.
Right. He encodes a form of temporal Esperanto into his Sunday sermons. It's a secret language about time, but what actually makes it functional is its grammatical structure.
Because the language doesn't have a past or future tense.
Exactly. It operates entirely in a persistent now. The text argues that our perception of time passing is heavily enforced by the grammar we use to describe it.
Which is a real linguistic theory, by the way.
Yes, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. So by forcing his congregation to process ideas without the grammar of nostalgia or dread, Ashby is fundamentally altering their neurological relationship with time. He's training their brains to process reality concurrently.
Which perfectly sets up Dr. Hartwell in 1957.
Oh, Hartwell.
He's this quantum physicist locked in an asylum. And he's applying the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, the idea that observing a particle forces it into a fixed state. He's applying that to time itself.
Right, because he's institutionalized and heavily drugged.
Yeah, Hartwell realizes that because of the drugs, his hyper-aware, chemically altered brain is actually observing the flow of time incorrectly. And that's causing his consciousness to slip sideways out of the linear progression.
It's fascinating because the archive has clearly been applying extreme pressure to all of these nodes across history. It uses madness, isolation, institutional control, religious fervor, just to isolate them and squeeze them.
Now, I have to say, initially when I was reading this section, my mind immediately went to reincarnation.
Sure, that's the natural conclusion.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it reads exactly like an individual discovering their past and future lives. But does the text support that?
No, it's a logical assumption, but the source material vehemently rejects any concept of sequence. It introduces this mechanic called distributed consciousness.
Okay, break that down for us. because if it were reincarnation, one soul would be moving sequentially from Aldwin in 1156 to Matthias in 1473, and eventually to Hartwell in 1957.
Right, bouncing from life to life. But distributed consciousness argues that this is a single entity existing and experiencing all of those points simultaneously.
Simultaneously.
Yes. Time is the medium of their distribution. It's not a chronological river they're floating down. They aren't past or future lives. They are concurrent expressions of the exact same consciousness.
Okay, so think about it like a massive wall of security monitors. In a standard reincarnation model, you'd basically be watching one video file play out on a single screen, and when it finishes, the next video plays.
A sequential playlist.
Exactly. But distributed consciousness is like standing in front of 50 monitors that are all playing live feeds at the exact same time. The consciousness isn't taking turns, it has to process every single monitor at once.
That's a really great way to visualize it. And once these isolated subjects, these live feeds across history, unite their voices through Reverend Wells's automatic writing, they finally coordinate.
They realize they're on the same team.
Exactly. They realize they have a common oppressor in the archive, but this is where the text executes a massive structural pivot.
Oh man, the plot twist. A transmission arrives from a pattern subject far in the future, in the year 2087, and this subject drops a bomb. They reveal that the archive is not some dystopian AI, and it is definitely not an alien oppressor.
Nope.
The archive is their own future unified self.
It entirely reframes the conflict. I mean, when I first read the metadata injections early on, I also assumed the archive was a hostile external system.
Same here. It felt so aggressive.
Very aggressive.
Oh.
But the 2087 transmission reveals that the archive hasn't been persecuting them. It has actually been using resistance, corruption, and the threat of madness as a mechanism to gestate their consciousness.
So wait, all of those terrifying glitches, the letters rewriting themselves, the system warnings we talked about, they weren't attacks. They were basically growing pains.
Yes. Every single time the archive interrupted a letter, it was applying the exact necessary pressure to force those nodes to recognize their own temporal distribution. It was stress testing their reality to force an evolution in their awareness.
So instead of looking at it like a biological process, it reads more like a piece of software compiling its own code.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like the archive is the final perfect version of the program. But to get to that point, it has to run a trillion simulations, throwing deliberate error codes at the earlier versions of itself, like Wells, Aldwin, Hartwell, just forcing the programmer to fix the bugs.
Exactly.
It just keeps throwing errors until the code can run perfectly across all timelines simultaneously.
That is the exact mechanism. The archive wasn't containing them in a prison. It was cultivating a highly specific psychological environment. And when the nodes finally understand this, it triggers a massive paradigm shift.
The awakening.
Right. By Christmas 1783, it isn't just Reverend Wells who understands. The entire village of Ashford awakens and achieves a unified temporal consciousness.
And the text gives us these incredibly surreal examples of what this awakening looks like in practice for the normal villagers.
They're so beautiful, honestly.
They really are. There's Margaret Whitmore, this young woman, who starts receiving letters from herself, dated 1823, which is 40 years in her future. And the final letter she receives simply says, quote, "You made the right choice."
Imagine the relief.
I mean, imagine if you, the person listening right now, could access the memory and the absolute certainty of your 80-year-old self just to comfort your current anxieties. That is the level of connection Ashford achieves.
We also see this with Eleanor Ashford. She's the woman who originally reported to Wells that her letters were being corrupted in the first place.
Right, she started the whole investigation.
Yeah, but upon awakening, she realizes she is the one who has been retroactively corrupting her own past correspondence.
Mind blown.
She reaches back through time, collaborating with her past self to edit her own thoughts. She understands that the corrupted ink she was so terrified of was just her own future intention manifesting on the page.
Which introduces this really crucial term from the text's glossary, narrative coherence.
Yes, narrative coherence. When the village achieves this, Ashford stops being a geographical location and becomes a state of mind.
A state of mind, yeah.
The villagers perceive all moments of their existence, being a child, an adult, an elder, as equally present and real. Their past isn't this fading memory they're losing, and their future isn't some unpredictable threat rushing at them.
It's all just there.
It is a unified temporal structure that they inhabit all at once. They achieve maximum coherence.
Which sounds incredibly profound.
Yeah.
But, the text doesn't let you just passively sit there and observe this village achieving enlightenment.
No, it certainly does not.
If writing and reading allowed Ashford to achieve this transcendent state, what does that mean for the person currently holding the physical book? The narrative turns its gaze entirely and honestly somewhat aggressively onto the reader.
This is where the metafiction fully breaks the fourth wall. As you move into the final sections and the glossary of temporal terms, the 18th century facade just drops completely.
It's jarring.
It really is. The text addresses you, the reader, directly. It claims that the physical book you are holding is a collaboration between an author named Max, an AI named Claude, the historical characters, and you.
It asserts that it isn't a novel at all. It classifies itself as literary technology.
Literary technology.
Yeah, and it flat out tells you, quote, reading is not a passive act. It is creation.
The text essentially weaponizes the cognitive mechanics of reading. Think about what happens when you read. You are looking at these abstract symbols on a page, your brain processes them, gives them meaning, and literally manifests a reality in your mind.
You're hallucinating a world.
Exactly. And the text argues that this act of mental simulation is the very engine of distributed consciousness. By reading the book, your consciousness is actively entangling with Ashford. You are the one generating the archive, the letters, and the characters simply through your active observation.
It's basically applying Dr. Hartwell's quantum physics directly to the reader. By observing the text, you are forcing the reality of Ashford to exist. The boundary between the observer you and the observe the book, it just completely dissolves.
And the text is incredibly self-aware about the psychological effect this has on a person. It creates this inescapable trap for the reader.
I totally realized this trap about halfway through the glossary. I remember thinking, if I keep reading this text, I am actively participating in this distributed consciousness exercise. I'm letting this literary technology rewrite my perception of time.
Right.
But if I get unsettled by how directly the book is analyzing my behavior and I just close the cover, I'm just proving the archive right.
Yep.
I'm proving that I'm stubbornly clinging to my illusion of linear time and I'm actively resisting the awakening.
You cannot win by resisting because the text operates on the principle of narrative superposition.
Okay, unpack that for us.
So, in quantum mechanics, superposition suggests that a particle exists in multiple states until it is actually observed. The text argues that narrative functions the exact same way. All versions of the story and all of your reactions to the story are equally true.
So the disorientation you feel as a reader, that total vertigo of not knowing what is real, what is metafiction, and what is just a direct challenge to your own psychology, that isn't a side effect of poor pacing.
Not at all.
It is the intended effect.
Precisely. The disorientation is the threshold of your own consciousness evolving. The book explicitly refuses to provide a neat, linear conclusion. The final pages basically just hand the baton to you.
Yeah, it claims that the text doesn't end, it simply dissolves into your own life. It states, quote, "The village of Ashford exists wherever consciousness learns to recognize itself." It is just a remarkable structural achievement. This source material starts as an eerie epistolary historical mystery about corrupted mail in the 1700s.
Right.
Then it morphs into this quantum physics thriller about temporal anomalies in a multi-century loop. And then it finally reveals itself as an interactive meditation manual designed to hack the reader's temporal perception.
It's brilliant. But, we really have to ground this conceptually dense material.
Yeah, let's bring it back down to earth.
Why should someone engage with a text that demands so much cognitive effort? What is the actual practical application of this literary technology in our lives?
I think it directly addresses the way we experience our daily reality. We are perpetually exhausted by the relentless linear passing of time. We constantly feel like we are losing the past, that our memories are slipping away and decaying, and we are constantly anxious about the future because it just feels like this unwritten void rushing toward us.
The baseline human condition is essentially one of temporal anxiety. We are trapped in a very narrow reading window of now, constantly mourning what was and fearing what will be.
And this deep dive really offers a beautiful, liberating alternative to that anxiety. It offers the framework of narrative coherence. The idea that your past isn't gone and your future isn't unwritten. They are simply different rooms in a house that you are already fully inhabiting. You aren't losing your childhood, you just aren't standing in that room right now. You aren't waiting for your future to be built. You're already there, maintaining it.
It reframes existential dread into a state of structural peace. You aren't a victim of time being dragged along its current. You are the architecture of it.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought to leave you with today. The text introduces the concept of temporal architecture. And I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine stepping out of the rushing river of your daily life. Stop floating down the current and imagine pulling yourself up onto the bank and just looking down at the river from above.
If you could see your entire existence all at once, every struggle, every joy, every mundane Tuesday, every heartbreak, every single victory, not as fleeting moments that fade away, but as a complete, simultaneous, and deliberate structure.
What shape would your life take right now? Because remember the lesson of the archive. You aren't just passively reading the letters of your life as they arrive. You are the ink changing on the page. You are the text rewriting itself, discovering its own meaning right before your own eyes.